We are often told that time heals all wounds. Cultural pressure suggests that if we just wait long enough, we can successfully move on. In 2022, the American Psychiatric Association took this expectation a step further by codifying prolonged grief disorder in the DSM-5. Under these new rules, intense suffering that persists beyond a strict 12-month threshold is officially categorized as a clinical pathology. Philosophers argue that these rigid timelines ignore the reality of human existence. By framing deep, enduring sorrow as an abnormality, the psychiatric establishment medicalizes what may be a necessary response to a catastrophic life event. Attempting to pharmacologically suppress this agony misses the point. The searing pain of grief functions as the very mechanism our minds require to rebuild our world after it has been torn apart. To understand this process, we have to look at how we build our sense of self. Philosopher Michael Cholbi points to our practical identity, the web of routines and shared values that we invest in other people. When a loved one dies, that investment is suddenly wiped out. Death renders a massive portion of the survivor's practical identity obsolete, requiring a slow, agonizing process of autobiographical reconstruction. This reconstruction is complicated by a fracture in time. Perceptual time, the motion of the physical world, keeps moving forward at a constant rate, but our narrative time, the story of our anticipated future, is suddenly abolished, freezing the survivor's internal timeline at the rupture. This paralyzing stasis is the mark of intense cognitive labor. The mourner is trapped in the work of weaving a permanent absence into a life story that no longer knows where it is going. While modern medicine looks for a cure, ancient frameworks like Buddhist metaphysics treat loss as a baseline reality. The entire psychological architecture of Buddhism is built around the inevitability of impermanence. In this view, we suffer because we cling to the illusion that the people we love will always be physically present. Accepting that universal flux is unavoidable allows for a more sincere, grounded way of loving in the present. The Stoic tradition offers a more disciplined path, demanding the systematic transformation of emotional passions. Philosophers like Seneca urged mourners to focus on gratitude for the time they were granted, while rigorously accepting that fate is entirely outside of human control. For these thinkers, the period of mourning is a required test of endurance. It is a wintering of the soul that consumes the raw material of suffering to produce unshakable inner wisdom. This process of rebuilding requires more than individual grit. The sub-Saharan philosophy of Ubuntu suggests that a person is only a person through other people. Within this relational framework, a death represents a massive communal rupture. Grief is not a solitary event occurring within the mind of one person. It is a hole in the social fabric itself. Healing under Ubuntu requires extensive communal networks, extended family and burial societies, who use structured rituals to repair that harmony. They work together to ensure the bereaved are not left to process the void in isolation. Rebuilding a fractured identity is a shared responsibility. It requires a caring democracy, where public support for the vulnerable is the foundation for individual resilience. Our capacity for grief also extends to the land. Environmental philosophers use the term Solastalgia to describe the distress we feel when our home environment is degraded. When an ecosystem collapses, it shatters the sense of place that human identity relies on. If we fail to process this ecological grief, we risk falling into a cycle of apathy, severing our emotional connection to the earth to avoid the pain of its destruction. Technology is now complicating this further with the rise of griefbots, AI avatars designed to mimic the voice and personality of the deceased using their digital data. These systems function as a pharmakon, simultaneously a remedy and a poison. They can offer real-time comfort during acute pain, but they can also anchor a mourner so deeply in a digital echo that they lose the ability to orient toward the future. Real relationships require friction. They demand patience and the ability to let go. If interacting with a digital avatar causes a mourner to abandon the complex work of relating to living humans, the technology has become a psychological poison, and its use must be ceased to protect our capacity for genuine community. Choosing whose lives we value brings grief into the political sphere. Feminist philosopher Judith Butler asks a central question: what makes a life grievable in the eyes of the state? Power structures often dictate which deaths are mourned publicly and which are ignored. When marginalized populations are victims of structural violence, their loss is often normalized or justified as collateral damage. Collective mourning is a radical political act. By grieving for those the state deems expendable, we convert private existential rage into a public demand for justice and a more equitable world. Jacques Derrida views this obligation as the structural necessity of love itself. To form a connection is to accept the absolute certainty that one person will eventually outlive the other, condemning them to the trauma of mourning. Derrida's concept of hauntology rejects the clinical pursuit of closure. Instead of severing bonds, he argues for keeping the deceased alive within one's consciousness, allowing their memory to actively haunt the present. By internalizing the gaze of the lost other, we stay open to the surprise of existence. Their lingering presence demands that we move through the world with more compassion and less forgetfulness.